time to relax after a long day of being a piece of shit.
It's the morning.
It's already 8 o'clock. God.
You've had, 30 minutes of being a piece of shit and you're already tired?
No, about a full hour. I was up early yesterday, but I don't know. It's a Saturday today. Though I like Saturday mornings.
Why?
It's the best day of the week.
Why?
Because there's no traffic. You can do...
But you're not going anywhere.
It doesn't matter. Anything you want to do on a Saturday morning, you can do. Most things are open. There's no traffic. There's no expectation to be anywhere. You can have brunch. You can go shopping. You can go to the beach.
Or you can be a bitch.
Why do I sound like Malibu Barbie? She has brunch, she goes shopping, then she goes to the beach. Do you think they're going to put Dianne Feinstein in the new Barbie movie? This Barbie thinks she's still in Congress.
Well, considering they've already filmed it, I doubt it.
Well, that's where she was. That's where Dianne Feinstein was for the past 2 or 3 months. They said it was shingles. She was filming the new Barbie movie. I saw her there with Hari Nef on set.
Allegedly.
This Barbie was once mayor of San Francisco.
And comes with her own wheelchair.
This Barbie's on the move.
I mean, thank you for teeing that up nicely.
That's what I do.
Speaking of certain Congress people, it's about time we have term limits.
This Barbie has term limits.
Is that like shingles?
No, term limits are one of those things that the American... It is like shingles. Term limits are what has to happen when you don't take care of the problem early on. Shingles is what happens when you don't take care of chicken pox or get it early on. Then you have to deal with term limits later on, being elected upon by the people who would directly affect.
Right. So, you and I were talking, and I wanted to record this because I have some very strong opinions. I've been pondering.
Let's have them.
I've been pondering some things, and the inner workings or lack thereof of our government system, and I'm of the opinion that over the last decade, our government's completely fallen apart. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and that is all the fault, quite frankly, of Congress and their ineptitude in passing any legislation. And I think that all stems from the fact that they're all afraid that they're not going to get reelected. So Congress has become one long campaign. None of them are doing their jobs. All they're doing is worrying about when's the next election, how can I raise some money, and how can I make sure I get reelected so I can keep this job.
Yeah.
So, well, for example... all of the power that Congress is supposed to wield is being thrusted upon the other two branches of government.
Thrusted?
So, perfect example was DACA, right? So, yes. Congress was supposed to do something, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it.
DACA, it's not it sounds like a weird like Croatian city or something. It was the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and later got named by the Obama administration as the Dreamers. Right. So it was the people who were brought here illegally as kids, and it's like, well, they're in the American school system now, so therefore they have to become citizens.
And under no fault of their own, like they were dragged here.
That was the biggest line, was under no fault of their own.
Yeah.
But with that situation, here's the problem. They were... In most situations, in fact, maybe in all situations, there is the idea that if you bring a young person with you, or if you are pregnant and you come to the United States, that increases the likelihood of your potential citizenship. Because the policy has generally been to avoid family separation. If you have a child who's a citizen, well, they have to bring their parents here because they were born here. Okay? And so it was kind of a bait and switch situation of this situation of, well, they've been here long enough, they've been here from middle school into high school, therefore they should be considered It should be fast tracked for citizenship versus, again, someone who is a software developer who came here, lost their job, and is really trying to get that green card.
Right.
With no regard to the country that they're in, of course.
Right. And
so that's just painting in the color here, because that was why I think Congress failed to act, because it became an emotional argument.
However, that doesn't excuse them. So the point is...
No. I'm not... No, I want to be very careful about this. That doesn't excuse them whatsoever. That's the tool that one of the tools that Congress uses to avoid responsibility and work is to turn something into an emotional argument, this is too important to not act on. Like, these are children. These are dreamers. He dreamt. You're a dreamer. You dream in your sleep. This kid dreamt of becoming an astronaut. Who are we to deny him? Mexico doesn't have a space program. This is literally how these people think. They think if they're emotional enough, they can bend the arm of an executive branch to act so that Congress doesn't have to do anything. Because when Congress has to do things, you do have to debate. Well, why do these 20,000 people need to become citizens and cut in line above other people? Why? Why
and
is that the
if
case?
they had that debate and had to make some kind of compromise or decision, they would lose.
They lose.
They'd lose support of constituents and maybe an election.
Right.
So,
they'd be like, look, you got free schooling here. Congratulations. You're very welcome. Now move it along.
It all stems to, we need to get reelected, and there are no term limits, so we can get reelected as many times as we are alive and functioning.
And now,
semi-functioning.
Well, Dianne Feinstein's pushing the boundaries of that.
Well, yeah. But
because you have somebody who is allegedly so far gone that they cannot even consent to a resignation. That's kind of like that sounds like a Better Call Saul tactic. Of like, they're so out of it that even if they sign a form resigning, well, I'm sorry, we can't accept that. You're too out of it. Right. That's genius. But yes, getting back to the concept of term limits.
Well, talking about DACA, I mean, they were, Congress was unable to act. They were unable to get some kind of comprehensive legislation together that was passable.
Right.
And so Obama was like, fine, I'll bear the brunt, and like signed an executive order, and all hell broke loose because the courts were like, well, can you do that? What? And we went into litigation hell forever.
Right.
I mean, is it still being decided? I don't know.
No, it is, because that's what happens when you sign an executive. An executive order basically says, I'm throwing this to the courts. So it's an executive order in a lot of situations is saying this is either A, too important for Congress to act on, B, has to happen too quickly to wait for Congress,
right,
or C, Congress is going to stall forever on something, so we have to like break the dam somehow. But you're abdicating both the responsibility of Congress to handle legislation, and you're abdicating the responsibility of the executive to handle policy implementation by just saying, well, we're just going to do this instead. That's what an executive order basically is. And then it throws it to the courts to decide for the next 6 to 8 years.
And I'm going to invoke a name here, but Sarah Isker.
Who?
She gave an analogy, a perfect analogy for this whole situation, where Congress is a class of students and the president is the teacher, and the president has some kind of magical wand to be like, okay, you no longer have to do this assignment. So Congress is working on an assignment, and all of a sudden the teacher's like, you know what? I don't feel like, waiting on you to finish this assignment. You're free. You don't have to do it anymore. And so now that that's happened once, twice, 3 times, now Congress is like, oh, can you please just wave that wand again and do our job for us so we don't have to do it?
And the courts are just the administrators, because one student's going to complain, and it's going to go to the administrators, and they're going to determine whether what the teacher did was right or not. That's basically what the system is. Right,
and it's now become broken because Congress, the current example is this debt ceiling business, and
that happens every few years.
Right, but this time, because someone, in their infinite wisdom, decided we're going to read the Constitution and the amendments of the Constitution in this certain way today, and we're going to say that the 14th Amendment allows us to do X, Y, and Z.
So the 14th Amendment has a clause talking about forgiveness of
Very,
debts
very,
in
very
wartime.
small, like...
Right, that's what I'm trying
Right,
to get to.
right.
It's like forgiveness of debts in wartime, and it was specifically designed to, from what I understand, address the situation during the Civil War, where the country literally fell in half, and you had Confederate debt, you had Union debt, you had a lot of these issues going on. So like, okay, this is how we solve this. If we can solve citizenship, we can also solve some of the debt that's owed by the South, and we can get this train rolling again.
Which, by the way, John Fetterman, in his infinite wisdom, apparently wrote somewhere that this is exactly why the 14th Amendment was created, for this very reason that we're trying to invoke it. And I'm like,
sure.
I don't think that's the case.
I'm surprised they didn't just cite a different amendment. Like, you know what? Having a debt ceiling is cruel and unusual punishment. And therefore, this portion of the bill, this amendment said, you can't have debt.
Well, in that case, we're all free.
They're pulling it out of their ass at this point.
Right. So, because Congress doesn't want to act, we're now bastardizing the Constitution, which is a huge problem. We're pulling things up out of thin air or out of their ass. And so now, people like Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren are yelling at Biden. I almost said Biden. Yelling at
Obama.
Biden, saying invoke the 14th Amendment, because if we don't, we're going to have to sign this. We're going to have to sign on to this Republican-sponsored bill and lose our progressive constituents.
We're going to have to cut spending. But that's why it's so silly, because this was discussed back when Biden was vice president and Obama was president. And I don't remember who it was, but someone floated the idea on the left of like, well, this debt clause in the 14th Amendment you could technically use to...
Oh, they pulled that up before?
They pulled that up then, and at the time, the Obama administration said, we will not use something like that. That is we don't think it's constitutional. We've consulted with legal scholars. We don't think that we can get away with that. That's not going to work. They literally picked that up and took it off the table. So that happened less than 10 years ago, I think. Right. And now here we are again.
Because we've gotten to the point where Congress really, they so don't want to do their jobs. They so don't want to do anything that they will look for a way, they will invent a way for someone else to take on their responsibility. And they know that if it gets challenged in a court, it's still going to buy them some time. It's still going to buy them a year's worth of time.
It's the same thing with the DACA thing going to court, because they were like, well, if we go ahead and grant citizenship to these kids are going to be 20 and already fully employed by the time it kicks in. We're not going to go in and retroactively take away their citizenship. So that ship has sailed. It was the most genius thing of kicking the can down the road to the point where it doesn't matter anymore. That was a real. They knew exactly what they were doing in that situation with DACA, because they knew if they were going to, like you said, debate it on its merits in Congress, never would have passed. Those kids would have been in the regular line for citizenship like everybody else, and everything would have been fine. We say kids. I mean, these people like 17. Okay, these are high school students. These aren't like babies. They always invoke like, oh, but how can this baby fill out citizenship forms? They always pull that shit, but. They knew if we get it far enough into adulthood, now these, quote, kids are 20, 30, have already had kids of their own, and are now full citizens because they were born here on this magical side of the borderline. Well, I mean, you can't deport these. They have children. They have jobs. They're contributing to the American economy. That same horseshit. Okay, great. Forget.
Well, and I apologize for changing the analogy, but this is like Congress is the child, and they're pitting the mom and dad, which is, executive and judicial branch, against each other, because they're constantly fighting now and having to, wage this legal battle, that legal battle, because Congress refuses to do their job. And
but
I
why?
will give it to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
I will give it to the Supreme Court that several times, after years of litigation, they come back and be like, no, this isn't right. Congress, do your job. And Congress is like, oh, we're sorry. But they never do their job. They never take the hint.
Okay, so that's why I want to unpack this a little bit more. Why is it that when their sole job is to legislate, pass legislation, have oversight over appointees, confirm treaties, all of Congress's all of Congress's constitutional responsibilities, why is it that the one most important responsibility, legislation, is the area where they fall short the most? Because the debt ceiling discussion, this is downwind of 2-3 years of record spending, stimulus packages, build back better. And whenever anybody invokes during those periods of time, hey, we're going to have to deal with this at some point, like all of this spending is going to have to go somewhere, they always get shouted down, no, what do you hate the American people? They need money now. That's the same situation. And then we get to the point where now, Janet Yellen, looking like Yoda, goes on TV and says, we're going to run out of money by June 1st. We're broke. This is the logical end game of this back and forth nonsense. So why are they not doing the job of legislating when it counts?
I mean, what I hinted at earlier, I think, I could be wrong. They're afraid. They're constantly in campaign mode. They're constantly in. We're past the idea of corruption. Yes, there's tons of corruption in Congress because they get in bed with this company that those lobbyists. Whatever.
It's a big bed.
All of that is true. But underpinning all of that corruption is the fact that they don't want to go back to their thankless jobs. They want to keep this one that's really, for all intents and purposes, cushy. I mean, obviously, I know they don't get much money as a congressperson.
But someone mentioned that. They were like, well, if you paid them commensurate with a large company CEO or board member, they would have no incentive to cheat. So they're basically saying that members of Congress should get paid in the realm of $1 to $8 million a year per member of Congress, and then they wouldn't have to go steal with two hands, which is another insane proposal.
But then they would
still steal with two hands.
But they would also clamor still to keep getting elected because that's a good salary.
That's a good salary, and it's one that this is the other problem. Okay, but with Congress, you're making $150, $200 per member per year, but you get that for life. If you're in Congress for, I think, past the first term or the second term, past a certain number of years, 4 or 5 years, it kicks into a life pension. Can you imagine any other job where you get paid your exact salary for the rest of your natural lives? If you get elected in your 30s or 40s, that's another 40 years of getting paid out forever. Also, by the way, you get top tier health care. Oh, by the way, also you get, transportation anywhere you want. And da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So it's like, even the brokest member of Congress even the brokest member of Congress gets a cushy job for life, even if they don't get paid $1 million a year. That money comes in one way or another.
So, yeah. This all ties back to the fact that they just want to get reelected over and over and over again.
So there's an incentive to be reelected, obviously.
Yes, and they won't do anything. They won't act. They won't even debate legislation because they're afraid that those sound clips are going to be used against them in some type of, campaign ad, and they might lose.
So if you're in a particularly liberal district, you don't want to be seen as being in the way of something of money that can go back to that district, because then you will get replaced.
And you don't want to be seen as, especially if you're, you have very progressive constituents, you don't want to be seen as kowtowing to Republicans in any way, shape, or means.
Because they'll show a clip of you shaking a Republican's hand, and
you're done.
Be like, and then you're done. Like they've made a big hard push with Dianne Feinstein this last time, because she said to was it Brett Kavanaugh, one of the Republican judicial employees, she said, or judicial appointees, she said, while a member of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for your answers. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with. And they were like, how dare she? How dare she say something like this? Get her out. And, it almost worked.
Well, and we use the example of Democrat versus Republican because that's what's happening right now. But it goes the opposite way, too. If any Republican is seen, praising some kind of progressive thing, Republicans would be up in arms. That's just how constituents are, especially nowadays.
But it's interesting because it's almost like being a member of Congress. If you take all of them and you average them out into what the ideal member of Congress is, you have to portray this warped image of this person who's fighting for you, but they also care about America's budget and our financial, future and us saving money as a country. But they also want to get you a new bridge for your district, so they're going to spend a lot of money to do it. But they also, it's like this weird sort of like Kevin Costner Yellowstone meme person of like, well, I got a few transgenders in my district, and they don't bother us none, but the real problem out there is China. And so it's this weird warped image of what they expect a member of Congress to be, and this is from any district in the country, of what they expect a member of Congress to be, because what members of Congress know is that once you get elected, the likelihood of you being reelected is very, very high, unless you massively fuck it up, because you have an incumbency advantage. Even though Congress as an institution has dipped to 9% approval, which I think that pedophiles have a higher approval rating than Congress, even though that Venn diagram could be a circle sometimes, 9% approval for Congress itself, most people have a positive view of their specific member of Congress because you see them show up at ribbon cuttings, you needed something from the VA, so you wrote them a letter, and their office did something for you. They greased the wheels for you to get you through the horrible bureaucracy that affects us all. So the constituent services that Congress do are by and large positive, but most offices can handle that. So it doesn't even matter who's in there. The office is going to be functioning. The office is going to get you your passport. The office is going to do whatever you need to do. So that puts the idea of term limits in a very difficult position, because people are like, yeah, Congress should have term limits, but not my congressman.
So the high level thing here is our government is falling apart. I believe you can trace most of that back to the fact that Congress is not doing their jobs. They're not doing their jobs because they're constantly afraid of losing their jobs.
Right.
And so if they were not afraid of losing their jobs because they only had a certain amount of times that they could have that job, or
like
certain
a
amount of years,
governor with term limits, like
right.
A governor can be elected once or twice or whatever.
I think that would solve a big part of the problem. Because imagine if you are a senator, senators have
6 years.
Right, 6-year terms. So if you had two terms as a senator, yes, okay, toward the end of that first term, you're campaigning and you're focusing on that to get reelected. By that second time of being elected, you can actually do shit, and you're like, well, I can't get elected again, so let me make the hard decisions of fighting for this or doing this, or because you have no incentive of pleasing other people. Right. You might actually do what you think is right.
I think 6 years would be fair for any member of Congress, because that's 2 election cycles for a member of the House of Representatives. That's 1 election cycle for a member, for a senator. And let's start moving it along a little bit. And okay, you can run again. Maybe we can have it to where you can have when you have something
non-consecutive.
I kept wanting to say non-consensual. When you have 2 non-consensual terms, no means no. Which, if you look at Senator Chris Dodd and Senator Ted Kennedy, they don't understand the concept of consent. Ask that waitress that they shoved into a booth. But okay, you have 6 years that you can serve in the Senate. You're off for 6 years. Then, if you really do want to run again, you can run after that. Then that way there's at least a break. You're not conducting a campaign while you're in there. That could potentially work. And that could be like an incentive of, look, you can be a senator at 35 and then maybe come back again in your 50s or 60s. Something like that.
Well, and we also have to worry about, obviously that opens up a big can of worms, because you have to worry about, okay, if this person's a senator for 6 years, are they then going to run for a House seat and be,
Usually people don't go down, though.
But
people usually go up.
But the point being, if they know that, okay, I'm not going to be this job.
But then for a House seat, okay, for a House seat, it should be you do your 2 years, 2 years, and then done. So you only have to worry about, you're in for your 2 years, you're probably going to win again, and then your last election. Like, what can you get done in those 6 years to move it along? Like, there should be, this is another thing, and this is a lot of people's complaint. Why are there so many old people in government? Because the incentive is created to keep these jobs for life. Even though you'd think your average 80-year-old might be like, I'm going to pull back, I'm done, I don't want to do it. Nope, your average 80-year-old in Congress is like, fuck it, I'm here for life, I'm going to stay in here forever, my constituents love me, like, I'm relevant.
And I understand why. I'm not going to say I understand the thinking of the framers of the Constitution. That's obviously ridiculous. But I'm fairly certain that they didn't think it would ever be a problem because no one would want to, at that time, being a representative or something like that, serving as a government official, was not a cushy and wonderful job. It was actually kind of difficult because you had to travel so far and you had to. So they were thinking, okay, someone is selfless, gives of themselves, and does this job for a little while, and then goes home and goes back to their life. Like, that's what they're going to want to do.
Yeah, they wouldn't think that people would actually want to stay there.
Right.
And I think the concept, too, was like, they wanted to create an environment that was similar to the environment in which the Constitution and the Declaration were formed. So the concept being, we have Benjamin Franklin, who's 70s, 80s, this very august, smart, reasonable, wise thinker. We want those people, possibly in the Senate. We want to incentivize those people to come into government and be a part of our participatory republic. But then you also want to represent the people who are out there working. And, James Madison's age, Thomas Jefferson's age, the guys in their 30s and 40s who are smart and young and who grew up as, a lot of those, you have to remember also, most of those people were not born. Most of the people around that time either had direct ancestry, like were one generation removed, or were born in Britain. And so the concept was, how do we incentivize to get these young, born in America people involved in the government and the running of the country that's just sort of fledgling and starting? So it was a very well set watch at the time. But that's the purpose of having amendments, is that you go back and you see how things play out, and you're like, oh, this was a mistake. Right. Not even necessarily a mistake, but people have found out how to cheat the system for their own personal benefit. And the whole point of this republic that we have set up is that doesn't happen.
So how do we get an amendment going to get term limits? And that's going to be nearly impossible.
Many routes to doing an amendment run through Congress,
right.
So that's impossible. You'd have to go through state legislatures, which is also somewhat impossible because the state legislatures are going to be like, well, the next is us.
Well, I'm curious. There must be at least one state constitution that has term limits on, or sure. At least a few that have term limits on their
representatives.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
So, I mean, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Maybe Colin can look that up. Like, which state...
We should do a study.
Well, yeah, that's a good to throw out at the audience thing. Do you know of a state legislature that has term limits, and has it been successful? Or has it been,
how does it work?
How does it work? Is it successive? Is it, do you still get a pension? Like, what that situation is? Because that's a really interesting thing. That's I think, a good lab test for how that works. Because if you look in other democratic systems of governance, especially in South America and stuff like that, there is a penchant for people to run for office when they're young, win, then step down or, stop running, and then come back again and again and again. And you have these leaders now in Brazil and in Argentina who come back in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s. And the worst part there is the family of leaders. So then you get the wife. You get the lunatic. The husband's in jail. The lunatic wife is in office. Sitting there crying on that Cristina Fernandez in Argentina. First of all, gay icon. Second of all, she's sitting there in taffeta, crying in the presidential office, saying, "They come after me. They always come after me." Oh, like crazy. But that's what happens. Don't cry for me. That's what always happens. So they found their own workarounds to that system. So it is interesting to see how could term limits affect? It sounds like term limits are the things that could affect getting things done. Because the dreaded end stage of this whole process, of an ineffective Congress, an executive that just wants to pass executive orders, and then a court that gets clogged up policing the other two branches constantly, instead of actual disputes among the citizenry or between states or things like that. If they just get caught up in, well, Congress should do this, the executive should do this, then you're left with the actual government, a bureaucracy that is unelected, that is out of reach, that has no sort of are they competent? Do they deserve to be there? Are they juiced in now? Do they have a pension? Do they have what interests do they work for other than this sort of large droning machine where change will not happen, and that actually runs the day-to-day of the country while you get distracted by your member of Congress, sleeping with an aide or something like that. I actually that just leads me to something. Have any two members of Congress ever slept together? That is the Watch What Happens Live question of the day.
I'm sure they have. We just may not know about it.
Who?
I don't know.
Was that the Kane incident back in the 1800s? Is that what happened? Was that a lover's quarrel? I don't know.
But, to tie this up and
you didn't answer the question.
Because I can't.
Is it true that Kevin McCarthy and Renee Elmer? Anyway.
This also leads to, and we have touched on this before, let's fix the congressional problem first. But
let's just do it this morning. Yes.
That's
what Saturday mornings are for.
No, I mean,
and cartoons.
Put those term limits in place first. But then that leads to the discussion of, not term limit, but a time limit on a Supreme Court justice, because we've noticed, as has happened in the past few times, they're putting, a president wants his legacy to last, so he appoints someone,
right,
to take a Supreme Court seat,
or she,
who's in their 40s,
right?
Maybe had 5 years on the bench. These people don't have the experience required for that job. None of them do. So when you should be appointing someone in their 60s, right? So they might have 20 years on the bench of the Supreme Court rather than 40.
I think that I'm okay with it being a lifetime situation for the Supreme Court. Number one, because
then maybe have an age limit. You have to have it. You have to be. Well, I don't know, something.
But the whole concept of the Supreme Court being that these people are beyond the reach of the electorate, in the sense that you elect a president, you vote for a president who then, you vote for electors who vote for a president who can appoint these people. So you want to pick a president who's going to pick a Supreme Court justice that is for you. But I think the concept of, they solve the term limit problem, or this person is on the Supreme Court until they're 60 and then they go get a job at ExxonMobil. They solve this problem of look, it's lifetime. Unless you really want to step down, you are beyond the reach of a corporation, of the bureaucracy, of the presidency, of anything once you're on there. Now, that has sometimes worked out negatively, because you've had some people who, the older they got, the more their opinions skewed in a particular direction. So that is something to consider. But I understand what you're saying about the incentivization of having younger and younger people, because that's 30 years on the bench, that's 40 years on the bench, that's 50 years on the bench. You're getting out of a young person.
Right, because for all intents and purposes, and I don't know the exact numbers, but Amy Coney Barrett and
Ketanji are both in their 40s.
Right? They both had very little experience actually sitting on the bench. I mean, right. They weren't there that long.
I think
both they made it to a higher court, right? They made it to a prestigious position, but they weren't there long enough to actually have experience to be able to sit on the Supreme Court.
I think that Amy Coney, and neither Amy Coney nor Ketanji were qualified.
No,
just on the qualifications. I don't think either of them were qualified. I think they were fine picks for the constituency, but I don't think for that particular job they were qualified. I think they might have been qualified for a district court first and then the Supreme Court, which is why, the 9th district is where they usually pick people from, or the appellate court is usually where they choose people.
But if both of those women had another 5 to 7 years on the bench, then maybe
then
okay.
I think yes.
But
I also think that Kavanaugh was not a great pick. I think that, and not for any of
He's
the
proving not to be a great pick.
well, I think not for any of the reasons that people on the left. Oh, I don't care about the high school shit. Like that's stupid. I just think that I think that he has a instinct where he will always bend in the wrong direction when questioned or something like that. I think Alito was a surprise because I remember when Bush nominated Harriet Miers first, which is stupid. That's like nominating Gloria Allred to the Supreme Court. Like it's not going to work. But Alito is the best legacy of the Bush administration. It might be the only legacy that's positive at this point. Roberts is spineless, but Gorsuch was a good choice. If Trump would have nominated another Gorsuch or Joe Larson or any of the 33 people or 35 people that the Federalist Society chose that would be successful picks, it would have been fine. I think the ones that were chosen were not the best. And I think that's, yes, you got 3 justices, you got your Roe v. Wade overturned, you got all your nonsense, that's great. But I'm talking about long term. There's going to be future situations where these people are going to probably disappoint you. They already have in some of their opinions. It's a little bit upsetting, and it's probably going to keep happening. I think that there's some better choices on that list, so whoever gets the presidency next is probably going to have at least 1, maybe 2 seats that they can nominate for. Choose wisely.
And by the way, if you as we end this, if you want to really, big shock, this Andy Warhol copyright case that was just decided had some really, really weird alliances on the Supreme Court. Like people siding, with each other on dissent and stuff that you would never have expected.
What was the final breakdown?
Oh, I didn't want to say it because I don't remember exactly.
Was it like 7-2? Because I know where I stand on this situation.
I think it was 7-2, but the you had
now I have to look it up.
You had you had several people siding with each other. I think like Jackson and Jackson and Alito were on the same side, which is like that should never happen. It was a really weird breakdown of alliances.
Okay, Sotomayor delivers the opinion of the court. Oh my god, I hate in these little things. Can I just put at the top what the fucking... Okay, Kagan dissented, which is rare that Kagan and Sotomayor...
Right, the two of them not agreeing on something is really weird, right?
Yeah. It's a long dissent. Okay.
And then you had like a couple of justices...
Kagan and...
writing a concurrence.
Roberts dissented. Okay, let me see. It was 7-2.
Right.
So you had 7 people with Sotomayor writing the opinion saying that... So basically, here's the thing. Andy Warhol, who is known for the silk screens and the prints that he makes, like the Maryland print, made a print of a photograph that a photographer made of Prince. So that's how many levels removed you are. So you have Prince, a photograph of Prince that a photographer took, and then Andy Warhol taking that photograph and turning it into one of his famous paintings. So he'll offset the framing, he will outline the person, he will add color, he will change the shading and the gradient, and blah, 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 blah. So the photographer sues the Warhol Foundation, saying that the photographer never received attribution or money because the photographer sold this photograph and the rights to it to a magazine where Andy Warhol found it,
right,
and then adjusted it.
Right.
Okay. So the thing at play is, did Andy Warhol materially change it enough to where it becomes its own piece of art, or it becomes a copyright issue of someone who made the original photograph that it was based upon? I have to side with the dissent in this situation, stating that Warhol's version was a material change on the original. And I looked through Kagan's dissent, and she cited many artists in the past that have taken someone else's work, modified it to their own extent, or drawn their own version of it, and this has never been an issue before in the past because it's a new piece of art.
And I, listening to some of the discussion on the case, I thought it was interesting that they were like, well, no one ever thinks to sue or anything when it comes to like parody and satire. Like you can use
Right.
you can use something almost exactly as it is as long as you're making fun of it. Like, why wouldn't we give deference to someone who has clearly changed something, but is not necessarily making fun of it, but is actually paying homage to it? Like,
Because this is the part that bothers me. Okay, great. This photographer took a famous photograph of Prince. Great, good for you. It should be Prince's estate that's making the money, but that's a different story. Great, good for you. You are not suing the man in Central Park who has a black and white silkscreen of your photograph that they're selling for $80 to tourists that walk through there. You are suing probably the wealthiest art foundation in the country for a private artist because you know that reproducing this photograph in books, that selling this, or reproducing this photograph, the painting of the photograph in books, selling the painting itself, is one of the most valuable artists in all of history doing it, and therefore you're thinking, well, if I had 10% of that, I'd be a millionaire. Yes, that's true. But instead of just being honored by the fact that Andy Warhol modified one of your photographs, you are now trying to sue for some kind of royalty there. And that, I think, opens up a lot of issue here because the whole point of that type of art is taking pop culture images, modifying them slightly,
right.
and, moving it along. So that, I'm sorry, I have to sit with Kagan and Roberts in the dissent on this.
And yes, I didn't want to get too long into those weeds. It's an interesting case. I thought it was fun, but I really thought it was weird the lineup of justices who sided with each other. It's like, this is something you'll never see again.
Right. Well, the Supreme Court makes strange bedfellows, and by the way, it was 9-0 in that Supreme Court decision recently about the woman who,
that poor woman.
this poor old woman in, where was it, Minnesota?
I think so.
Something like that, where she had a condo. She owed taxes to the county, I think Hennepin County.
Yes.
Which is where Minneapolis and St. Paul is. Okay. They basically take over control of her condo, sell it at a profit, and then keep the profits.
Right.
Which, I love this. So, on one side, you had Neil Katyal, who was one of the Obama shortlist people for the Supreme Court, and Biden shortlist people, the former Solicitor General of the United States, took up this case pro bono on behalf of the county, saying, yeah, we should keep the profits. Fuck them grandmas. And then
93-year-old woman, by the way.
93-year-old woman now. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0. Fuck you. That was illegal. You cannot just take someone's property, government, sell it at a profit, and then keep the profits. That's insane.
Which, and the last thing I'll say about that is I don't understand why the government wouldn't have just, because it was like a foreclosure type thing.
Right.
Why they wouldn't have just sold it for how much they needed or how much, like, why would you even get into the business of
real estate?
Worrying about,
Right.
bringing this to court. Like, who thought that this wasn't going to be a problem?
Also, that talk about something that affects people more than anything. We want to say on one hand, these seniors, they can't afford their health care bills. They're sitting, they're hand to mouth. We have to have Medicare and everything like this. These poor seniors on their fixed income and everything like this. And on the other side, being like, oh, by the way, we're going to sell your fucking condo, make you homeless, put you in a rest home,
and make money off of it.
make money off of you. That's an insane concept.
Well, good for the Supreme Court. That's all I'll say.
But yeah.
But as for Congress people, they can go fuck themselves, just like you.
They do. They do.